Now that you've gotten your source material, we're going to then talk about how to start the process of creating an outline. So on the road to a great speech, I know that's a little corny, but it fits really well with this, we're going to talk about how you can actually understand the outline and break up the speech in a way that's going to help you. So first off, the outline is a cohesive way to break up the information and organize it. A lot of times students think that they have to sit down and write the entire thing out, and in fact that's a really bad way of writing a speech. You want to start thinking about your speech in different parts, kind of like different post-it notes, things that you want to cover. And of course the speech itself kind of breaks down into 3 post-it notes. The first starting with the introduction, the second with the body, and then of course breaking down your points. I'll be starting to touch on how you can start breaking down your points and figure those out, and then the conclusion, which I'm not going to be touching on in this video yet. So let's start with the introduction. It breaks down into 5 parts: the attention getter, the thesis, the ethos, the value step, and the preview. If you've taken an English course, the attention getter and the thesis and preview most likely look familiar to you. Keep in mind, the thesis is going to be the main idea for your speech. So if you submitted a really specific speech topic, that actually may end up being your thesis, right? What you're going to cover in the speech. The preview is going to be a breakdown of how you're actually going to cover it, kind of giving your audience a map of where you're going to go. I'm going to address the preview a little bit more in a second. But let's start first with the attention getter. So the attention getter is kind of self-explanatory. It's getting the audience's attention. You want to start with something that's creative and short. It should not take a large portion of the speech, 30, 45 seconds, especially for this first one. Some suggestions, videos, quotes, statistics, all of those sorts of things. The attention getter is really important because it sets the tone for the speech. If you do something that's really boring, like you just read a quote and it doesn't have any impact, the audience is going to feel that and not be interested. So don't use the attention getter as a missed opportunity. It's important that you start off strong. Now, once you've engaged the audience and told them what your thesis is, you also want to establish ethos. So this is a theory of Aristotle's, which is basically that a speaker needs to establish himself as worthy of the audience, right? Why would someone listen to you if you don't have ethos? So your character, credibility as a speaker. Now you may be asking yourself, how do I add ethos? How do I prove that I have character or credibility as a speaker? There's 2 different ways to do this. The first one is to establish a personal, professional, or academic connection to the topic that you chose. So let me give you some examples. Majoring in nutrition, I know the importance of a well-balanced diet. I clean up the beaches every Saturday morning and have seen the devastation litter can cause. Having a family full of medical professionals, I can tell you how important it is to pay attention to your heart rate. Now, let's say you have none of those connections, right? You don't major in nutrition, you don't clean up beaches, or no other connection to your topic. That's okay. Don't panic. You can still establish ethos. You need to discuss your research instead of your connection. So here's an example. Having extensively researched all the options for fuel-efficient cars, I can tell you which ones are the best. Another thing you're going to need to establish is the value step. So keep in mind when you're thinking of your topic and your speech itself, we have to go back to the rhetorical situation or the rhetorical triangle. The audience is always at the center of decisions you make when you're creating an effective speech. So the value step essentially answers the question of what can they gain from the speech. Sometimes other people will refer to the value step as the reason to listen, right? What is in it for them? Why is this a speech that relates? So let me give you an example of that. Let's say you're doing a speech on the Titanic. Some people may think, well, I don't care about the Titanic. It's a ship that crashed long time ago, doesn't relate to me. So you need to ask the question of why should they listen? And the answer is going to lead you to the value step. So here we could say the importance of history. So here's a value step. The sinking of the Titanic was one of the largest non-war related disasters in history, and it is important to be knowledgeable about the past. Here's another one. Same topic, by the way, still the Titanic. Love the film or the popularity of the film, maybe using pop culture to connect them. The film Titanic was one of the most popular films of the late 90s, but many fans of the film may not realize that it left out a lot of important information. So both of these are ways in which you can connect your audience. So what I'm going to do now is show you the introduction of a speech, and I'm going to identify the portions that are in the speech itself so that you can see what an attention getter, a thesis, a preview, a value step, and all those things look like.
Applicant A. John Williamson is 5'6", or 5'5" rather. He weighs 150 pounds, has blonde hair, green eyes, an MBA from Harvard, and average work experience. Now let's take a look at applicant B. William Johnson is a 6-foot male, weighing 175 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, MBA from Stanford, and also average work experience. Now, based on these facts alone, make the quick decision. Which would you hire? Can I get a show of hands for applicant A? Show of hands for applicant B? Right, so by the overwhelming majority, for those of you who chose William Johnson, you're in agreement with numerous hiring boards across the globe. But do we know why? We can give most credit to the cliche, tall, dark, and handsome. In a 2004 edition of the Journal of Applied Psychology, it was shown by Timothy Judge and Daniel Kugel that on average, a man who is 6 feet tall will earn $5,525 more annually than someone who is 5'6". Now, while this may seem like a small annual difference, in 5 or 6 years, Mr. Johnson will be dreaming of luxuries that Mr. Williamson could never afford. Coming from a family of giants, I've always been aware of the downside of being tall, but after doing some research, I realized that there are many positive benefits, especially in the professional world. And as college students about to go out and face the real world, it's good to know which factors are working for and against you when applying for jobs. So today, I'd like to discuss with you the origins, psychological and societal reasons, and the effects of the high income stereotype. These origins.
So now that you've seen what an introduction looks like, let's move on to the body of the speech. So for the body of the speech, we've been working on that through this worksheet right here, focusing on both the problems and the solutions and possibly the causes if it's relevant to what you're going to be talking about, and then developing that with your supporting evidence. So what I'm going to ask now is that you start taking the material that you have in here and start utilizing these two worksheets that I'm going to talk about here that are on my faculty page. So these worksheets are actually going to break down, well, how do you take the material that you've found in your research and that you've started working on and put them in these actual formats. So this first worksheet is focusing on Monroe's motivated sequence. And what I basically set up here are on top, these are the requirements, and then I've broken down each thing that you need to do in each part of the outline. So the first is your introduction, and you'll notice what I did here is in green, I specifically list what you need to do in that step. So many times I'll have students who will just take this document, erase the green part, and then just, start writing whatever it is that their relevancy statement is going to be. I'm just writing gibberish there, obviously. All right, for Monroe's, so obviously the first body step is need, and again, I address what that is here in green. Now, you'll notice the way I basically have it set up is the first point, right, the way this works is I have first point, I have idea of development or support, supporting evidence, so using your research, and then in-depth analysis, talking about why this is important, what's the takeaway. You don't have to actually do it like this, and that's why at the very top I put this is a guide. You do not have to follow this step by step. But what this is really good with is, basically reminding you of things that you probably should be doing in some parts of the outline. So you definitely do need a first point. What is it that you're going to talk about as your problem? Maybe you don't need to develop the idea. Maybe it's very clear and you just want to jump straight to supporting evidence. Maybe you don't need development or in-depth analysis, but let's say on your second point, maybe you really do need to talk a little bit more about your point. That's perfectly fine. All of these just kind of work as things to remind you to do. You don't have to do all of them. You don't even have to have, say, 1 point and 2 point in the need. You could have 3 points. You could have only 1 point. Again, it's completely up to you. Another thing to point out, I have something called a non-factual source. So this is just something that's going to add to your supporting evidence, your factual evidence, and it counts as things like narratives, visuals, quotes, things like that. So that's also something that you could utilize to further add to what you're talking about. Then you would want a transition. We'll talk more about those in class. Next step is satisfaction. So again, like we talked about in class, this is the what and the why. And again, I'm just kind of reminding you of things that you need to do. But like I said, maybe you don't want in-depth analysis on this one, but maybe on point 2, you want that. So this is just something you can utilize to type into and really utilize it and craft it to the way it works for you. Visualization is the next step. So remember, that's a narrative or mental picture. I don't have a lot here because remember, that's mainly focused on the story. So keep in mind for the need and the satisfaction step, that's a lot of where your research is going. So those should be the largest portions of your outline. And then action is just giving the audience tips, and then the conclusion, which we'll also be talking a little bit more about next class. So this is the one for Monroe's, and again, this is on my faculty page. This is the one for problem, cause, solution. And again, like I put here, this is just a guide. You don't have to follow this step by step. The requirements are listed up here. So the introduction is pretty much the same. The only major difference is Monroe's has an actual attention step, which is basically an attention getter. So these are all the same. The first step is problem. So just like in need, a problem, or Monroe, excuse me, you're going to be discussing what are the issues. Again, I have a similar setup. You don't have to do this specifically. They're just good things to remember. So maybe for your second point, you might want to use in-depth analysis, and for your first point, you only want to use supporting evidence and a non-factual. Again, totally up to you. Transition, cause, remember this is optional, so for some of you, you may not even have this at this point. And then solution. So what is it, that you actually want to do? You need to put that clearly. And then the big part of solution, the most persuasive part, is discussing effectiveness, proving that it's going to work. So the evidence is especially going to be important in the solution and the problem step for addressing that. As far as your supporting evidence, I've just listed here, you do want to say where it's coming from, give the credibility of the source, who is the author, or, is it a book, cite the book, the journal article, whatever it is that the audience needs to know that's credible. So that is what you're going to be doing for the body of your speech.